What if I told you that hydrogen-powered cars were already on the road over 80 years ago and were mysteriously forgotten? This isn't fiction. It's the starting point of one of the most overlooked and perhaps most deliberately silenced chapters in the history of mobility. Imagine living in 1935 and seeing a car that didn't produce smoke, didn't make noise, and ran on the most abundant element in the universe: hydrogen. Now imagine that car simply vanished from the records. And worse, no one ever talked about it. Yes, hydrogen cars are not a modern invention. They were already being considered, tested, and in some cases even driven on the streets long before Tesla, long before the climate crisis, and long before anyone seriously imagined a truly clean way of getting around. And yet they disappeared, shelved, dismissed, and replaced by combustion engines with all the smoke, noise, and oil dependency we know far too well. Why doesn't anyone talk about this? The answer might shock you, or anger you. What happened to the hydrogen cars of the past wasn't just a technical failure, it was a forced disappearance. A decision driven by economic interests, political pressure, and, as you're about to find out, a system that never wanted to give up control over the energy that powers the world. In this video, we'll dive into a little-known but deeply relevant story. We'll go back to a time when scientists, engineers, and visionaries tried to give the world a clean, safe, and efficient alternative to oil, and were silenced for it. You'll discover names, dates, patents, and projects that prove this technology existed, and that it was deliberately buried. This isn't just about history. What you're going to see today has everything to do with the present, with the debates about the future of mobility, the role of big corporations in deciding what you can or can't drive, and how the truth can be hidden for decades when it threatens the people in power. So get ready, because what you're about to learn is more than surprising. It's disturbing, and once you've watched it, you'll be asking yourself, how many other technologies have been erased from history just because they weren't profitable enough? In this video, you'll find out how this technology was erased from history, and the reason might surprise you. Imagine living in a world where the solution to the climate crisis had already been around for over 80 years. A world where hydrogen-powered cars roamed the streets, emitting nothing but water vapor. No pollution, no noise, just clean and efficient energy. And now, imagine that future was intentionally blocked, erased, silenced. That's exactly what you're going to uncover in this video. You might be thinking that hydrogen is something new, experimental, or still being tested. But the truth is, this technology was already applied, studied, tested, and abandoned. Why? That's what this video will reveal. And it's not just a story from the past. It's a truth that directly affects our present and shapes our future. The promise here is clear. By the end of this video, you'll have access to information you've probably never seen anywhere else. We'll revisit forgotten projects, buried prototypes, and uncover the behind-the-scenes decisions that shaped the path of the entire auto industry. You'll understand why, even today, hydrogen is still treated as a distant dream, when it could already be a solid reality. But this isn't just about cars. It's about how behind-the-scenes decisions shape what society believes is possible. It's about how certain industries have the power to suppress innovations that threaten their profits. It's about how knowledge can be manipulated, hidden, or mocked when it challenges the interests of the people running the game. This video is for those who want to go beyond the ads and car commercials, for those who are tired of accepting pre-packaged truths, for those who ask, if we have the technology to change the world, why aren't we using it? Let's talk about archived documents, secret projects, and scientists who were silenced. Let's make it clear that hydrogen-powered cars are not science fiction. They were real. And what you're about to see may make you angry, outraged, or simply shocked. But more than anything, it will bring you clarity. You'll understand how companies chose to ignore this technology out of fear of losing control over fuel. You'll See how governments turned a blind eye and even funded competing projects just to keep the fossil fuel structure intact. You'll learn that across several decades, the 1930s, 1950s, 1970s, and 1990s, hydrogen came knocking and was turned away, always with convincing excuses, but never technical ones. We'll reveal stories like that of a German prototype from 1938 that ran on compressed hydrogen with remarkable efficiency, or the American project from the 1970s that promised fuel cell-powered cars and was shut down just days after a meeting with oil industry executives. Coincidence? That's what we're going to explore. You'll realize it's not a lack of technology that held hydrogen back. It's an excess of interests. And here's the second part of this promise. You'll also see the present in a new light. Because today, while the media talks about sustainability and energy transition, many decisions are still guided by the same interests from the past century. The race for lithium, the monopolies surrounding battery production, the disposal and mining issues, all of it suggests we might just be swapping one problem for another. So, if you want to understand why hydrogen is so rarely talked about, despite being so promising, this video is for you. And if you want to uncover what major corporations don't want you to know, stay until the end. Because the most revealing part comes in the final moments. A twist that ties everything to what's happening right now, in real time, before our very eyes. We'll also show you comparisons that never make it into marketing reports. Range, speed, environmental impact, long-term costs. We'll talk about what hydrogen truly offers and why that's such a threat to today's systems. You'll see that the battle isn't just technological. It's ideological, economic, and deeply strategic. And there's more. We'll present statements from former employees of major automakers who admitted in interviews that hydrogen projects were deliberately shut down, that they were ready, but considered too inconvenient. What does that even mean? You'll find out. And this isn't just about telling a good story. It's about exposing a pattern of sabotage repeated over decades that prevented the rise of a clean, safe, and abundant solution. It's about shining a light on what was hidden, distorted, or simply erased from the official narrative. And in the end, this promise becomes an invitation. Reconsider what you think you know about innovation. Reflect on what you're told is progress, and what's really just control, dressed up as advancement. By the end of this video, you won't just have information. You'll have context, you'll have arguments, you'll have clarity. Clarity to understand the past, clarity to question the present, and clarity to imagine a future that doesn't have to repeat the mistakes of yesterday. So, are you ready? Because what comes next might change the way you see not just cars, but the entire world we live in. War was reshaping the planet. Bombings, armies on the move, factories working day and night. Technology had become both a weapon and a symbol of hope. Amid the roar of tanks and planes, few people knew that behind the scenes, hidden away in research centers across Germany, something completely different was being built. A car that made no noise, that released no smoke, that ran on a nearly infinite fuel, hydrogen. These scientists weren't working under military orders. Many were civilians, engineers searching for more than just a way to win the war. They wanted to win the future. They believed that once the conflict ended, humanity would need to rebuild everything, including its relationship with energy. And hydrogen seemed like the answer. Imagine a lab with a concrete floor, rusted pipes on the ceiling, and large hydrogen cylinders lined up like sentinels. Scribbled notes in German, chemical formulas, sketches of primitive fuel cells. On a wooden drafting board, drawings of a vehicle that looked more like a spaceship for its time. Curved lines, a silent motor, and hydrogen tanks where a gas tank would normally be. The project was internally known as Project Wasser, Project Water, and the name made perfect sense. After all, the reaction between hydrogen and oxygen produced energy and only one byproduct: water vapor. It felt like magic, but it was real, and they were close to making it practical. But there was a problem. No one in power wanted to hear about it. At the time, Germany saw no future in clean technology. The focus was on tanks, planes, powerful engines. Oil was still a symbol of dominance, and so the project was gradually smothered. Funding was cut, scientists were scattered, and what wasn't destroyed was burned. Many documents were intentionally incinerated. Photos disappeared. Some parts of the prototype were reused in other experiments. The car, or what was left of it, was dismantled, and the names behind the invention were lost to history. But Project Wasser wasn't the only one. What happened in Germany was echoed in other parts of the world. In the United States, around 1950, Alice Chalmers began experimenting with fuel cells in tractors and utility vehicles. The goal was to create an alternative to diesel engines for agricultural and industrial use. One of the models worked perfectly, but it was expensive. And once again, no one wanted to support the change. In the same decade, General Motors studied a hybrid system that used both hydrogen and gasoline for light vehicles. The tests were promising, but the results were labeled as technologically advanced, yet commercially unviable. A common excuse when the real issue isn't feasibility, but political and economic convenience. In the 1970s, during the oil crisis, hydrogen made its way back into the labs. The world was panicking. Long lines at gas stations, fuel rationing, prices skyrocketing. Suddenly, interest in hydrogen surged again, but it didn't last. Once oil prices stabilized, the funding vanished, and once more the technology was shelved. The pattern was always the same. Hydrogen appeared as the savior, and then was quickly cast aside as soon as the status quo returned, always with the same justifications. It's too expensive, there's no infrastructure, it's not the right time. But who decides that? Who defines the right time? Back to the visual narrative. In every decade, silent laboratories held extraordinary secrets. Locked rooms, confidential folders, prototypes hidden beneath tarps, and in each of those rooms there was at least one frustrated engineer. One scientist who truly believed hydrogen could change everything, but who was forced to take another path, or to give up entirely. Many of these engineers never received recognition. Their names don't appear in history books. Their ideas were dismissed as too idealistic, and yet decades later, here we are, revisiting them, because what they created was visionary. In 1990, BMW made another attempt with an experimental fleet of hydrogen-powered cars. The vehicles ran well, were showcased at international expos, and drew the attention of the automotive press. But once again, the project was quietly shut down, with no official explanation. At the same time, Mazda developed a hydrogen-powered model using a rotary engine, but it ran into strategic issues in production and supply. Translation: there was no real interest in disrupting the existing market structure. These stories are not coincidences. They're part of a silent storyline, one where innovation isn't measured by usefulness, but by its impact on the profits of powerful industries. A storyline where technologies that challenge the pillars of the system aren't encouraged. They're buried. And this brings us to a deeper question. How many other brilliant inventions have been shelved the same way? How many revolutionary ideas were burned along with the documents from Project Wasser? And worse, how many are still being hidden today? The context you're learning about now is an invitation to awareness, to understand that what has reached us as progress was often just a choice guided by those who had a vested interest in keeping the world as it was, not in making it better. And in that sense, the story of hydrogen is symbolic, because it shows that the best technology doesn't always win. Sometimes winning simply means being convenient for those already in power. But that's beginning to change. Today, as the planet faces a climate emergency, with governments under pressure to act and consumers demanding real alternatives, hydrogen is making a comeback. The difference now is, we have the chance to tell this story and ensure it's not erased again. And maybe, by understanding how it all began, we can finally correct the course. The hydrogen-powered car could have changed everything. Zero emissions, abundant fuel, less dependence on oil-exporting nations. A true revolution. But that revolution never happened. And the most shocking part? It was sabotaged. The problem wasn't technical, it was political. It was economic. It was strategic. Unlike oil, hydrogen couldn't be easily monopolized. Any country with access to water and electricity could produce it. It posed a direct threat to the power structure built around fossil fuels, and for that reason, it had to be suppressed. The major oil companies weren't about to give up the dominance they had built. Governments weren't ready to restructure entire distribution systems. And automakers, used to combustion engines and the profitability of maintenance parts, saw hydrogen as a commercial risk. So what we see, decade after decade, is a pattern repeated with almost surgical precision. Promising projects emerged, then vanished. Advanced research made headlines, then was quietly discontinued. Working prototypes existed, but never reached production. Some of the cases are almost unbelievable. In 1973, during the oil crisis, a small startup in the U.S. unveiled a city car powered by hydrogen that could run nearly 200 kilometers on a single charge. The car worked well, caught the media's attention, and had competitive costs. A few months later, the company was bought out by a consortium tied to the oil industry. The project was canceled. The files were sealed. The patent was never used. Coincidence? In the 1980s, GM funded an independent lab to study energy alternatives. When the team concluded that hydrogen was the most viable long-term solution, the funding was abruptly cut. Two engineers involved later gave anonymous interviews revealing they had been pressured to sign non-disclosure agreements. More recently, a leaked report from a former energy advisor to the U.S. government revealed that a favorable report on hydrogen was shelved due to pressure from natural gas lobbyists, who viewed hydrogen as a direct competitor. And this isn't just happening in the United States. In Europe, documents show that the European Union received at least 3 proposals during the 1990s to integrate hydrogen into its energy policy. All were rejected. One of the proposals acknowledged that infrastructure costs would be high, but the environmental return would be significant. Even so, the funds were redirected toward biofuel development, a solution that, conveniently, kept oil companies in control of the supply chain. But perhaps the most emblematic case is Toyota. The Japanese automaker invested heavily in the development of the Mirai, a hydrogen-powered car that launched in 2014. The car works, it's on the market, but it faces an invisible barrier: the lack of fueling stations. The infrastructure doesn't exist, or rather, it hasn't been built. And why not? Because no major company wants to invest in something that breaks from the traditional model. Building hydrogen stations requires restructuring, planning, and a new business model. One where companies that currently earn billions would have to give up control. So, nothing happens. The Mirai is there, ready, sitting still, because modern sabotage doesn't destroy. It paralyzes. It suffocates through inertia. And that's what stings the most. For decades, we were told that clean technology wasn't ready, that the world couldn't live without gasoline, that we needed time, investment, research. Meanwhile, the real alternatives were locked away, hidden behind closed doors. Many of the scientists who worked on these projects didn't even know they were being sabotaged. They poured in their passion, their dedication, believing they were building the future, Only years later did they realize that the system never intended for that future to arrive. And here comes the outrage. How is it possible that, in the face of an escalating environmental crisis, solutions like hydrogen were buried? How can we accept that billions of people breathe polluted air, pay high prices for fuel, and live through climate disasters, when there was another choice? It's no exaggeration to say lives could have been saved. Cities could have been cleaner. The world could have been fairer. But that wasn't convenient. It wasn't profitable. Profit spoke louder, and hydrogen was pushed to the margins of history. Most people have never even heard of the experimental hydrogen cars from the 1930s, 50s, or 70s. They've never seen the photos, never read the reports, and that's no accident. The story was edited, and that's why this video exists, to show you what was hidden, to reveal what was buried between the lines, to reignite the flame of an idea that was silenced but never killed. Because hydrogen is still here. The technology has advanced. The technical challenges have been overcome. What's missing now is political will, corporate courage, a collective outcry that says, enough with relying on what destroys. We want what can save. And for that, we need to understand the conflict. A conflict that didn't just happen in labs or spreadsheets. It happened behind the scenes, in meeting rooms, in phone calls between CEOs and ministers, in classified documents, in lobby efforts that never make the news. Hydrogen was sabotaged, and knowing that is the first step toward ensuring it never happens again. For decades, the official narrative was sold as absolute truth. Hydrogen was promising, but not yet viable. Too expensive, too unstable, too futuristic. A great idea for maybe someday. But that story has begun to crumble. In recent years, documents once marked as classified have come to light, revealing a very different version of events. A story that was hidden, muffled, carefully erased from official records. And what those documents contain changes everything, thanks to the efforts of independent researchers and Freedom of Information Act requests. Historical data from the 1950s has been released through public archives in Germany, the United States, and even the former Soviet Union. And what do they show? That the first hydrogen-powered vehicle prototypes not only worked, they were incredibly efficient. In 1953, a team led by German engineer Carl Schaefer built an experimental model using compressed hydrogen and a high-purity fuel cell. In supervised tests, the car reached a range of 486 kilometers, more than some modern electric cars from Tesla, Nissan, and Chevrolet. And that was 70 years ago. No lithium batteries, no advanced digital infrastructure, just pure science and vision. The project was presented to the West German Ministry of Economics and even received praise in internal reports. But 2 weeks after the presentation, the car was pulled from the lab and destroyed. Yes, destroyed. Completely dismantled. What remained, parts, sketches, and the original fuel cell, was confiscated. And this was by direct order of a high-ranking government official who, according to the documents, had a close relationship with executives from Shell and Esso. The exact note written in one of the internal memos read, "This project is not aligned with the strategic interests of the Federal Republic at this time. It must be terminated immediately." That decision wasn't an isolated case. A similar pattern was observed in another instance in the United States in 1961. A company called Electrotech developed a hydrogen-powered pickup truck prototype with a range of 300 miles. It even participated in a National Energy Innovation Expo. After the event, the company was acquired by an energy conglomerate, and the project vanished. No articles published, no prototypes preserved, no staff reassigned, just silence. The similarities are deeply unsettling. Records show that in all these cases, the projects were in advanced stages, with public demonstrations scheduled, and they disappeared suddenly after direct contact with representatives from the oil industry or government agencies tied to energy policy. Those documents alone would be enough to raise doubts, but what truly shocks are the testimonies attached to the files. One of them, from a test engineer at Electrotech, states, "That day, the boss walked in and ordered everything to stop. He said the EO orders came from the top, that the project was too good to be real, that the world wasn't ready to let go of oil. We were in shock, but we obeyed." Another, from a German Ministry of Industry employee in 1954, "We knew it worked, but there was pressure. We were told hydrogen couldn't become popular because it would weaken Germany's position as a refining and oil import hub." Now, stop and think. How many times have you heard that hydrogen vehicles aren't viable? That they still need more development? That they're not ready to compete with battery electric cars? How many of those statements, repeated for decades, were based on manipulated information? These revelations change everything. They show it wasn't the technology that failed, it was the system that refused to let it succeed. More than that, they show there was active sabotage, not just passive neglect. We're not talking about indifference. We're talking about deliberate decisions to bury clean solutions. That could have transformed society. And if that sounds like a conspiracy theory, remember, all of this is documented, with dates, locations, signatures, and names. Even diplomatic telegrams exchanged between embassies mentioning strategic concerns over the public viability of fuel cell technology. What does that mean in practice? It means hydrogen could have been on our streets since the 1960s. That clean, silent vehicles with long ranges were already possible back then, but they were crushed, burned, silenced. Literally, as shown in photos of prototypes smashed with sledgehammers found among declassified archives in Germany. And if it weren't for determined researchers who insisted on digging, scanning, and publishing these files, the story would still be buried. But now that it's out, a new question arises. If this happened in the past, what else is being hidden today? Because if something this promising was destroyed 70 years ago, what guarantees that other innovations aren't being suppressed right now? These revelations don't just reshape our view of the past. They cast an uncomfortable light on the present. They force us to ask, who gets to decide what's viable and why? They make us reconsider everything we thought we knew about the history of energy. And maybe, most importantly, they reignite hope. Because if all of this was already possible once, then it still is. The knowledge exists. The foundations are already here. The difference now is that with information in the hands of the public, hiding the truth becomes harder. This turning point isn't just technical. It's symbolic. It shows that even in the face of historical erasure, truth always finds a way, and when it does, it transforms. Today, hydrogen is back at the center of the energy debate. When we talk about clean energy for the future, it's mentioned alongside solar, wind, and battery electric cars. Automakers like Toyota, Hyundai, and Honda have already released hydrogen-powered models on the road. The Toyota Mirai, Hyundai Nexo, and Honda Clarity are real examples that this technology isn't just promising. It's already functional. But what few people realize is that this so-called innovation isn't new. We're just trying to reinvent something that already existed. And if it hadn't been buried, we'd be living in a very different world today. The truth is, we could be decades ahead in the use of hydrogen as an energy source, if it hadn't been sabotaged throughout the 20th century. Instead of starting now, slowly, we could already be reaping the benefits of a clean, decentralized, and accessible energy network. As the world races against time to reduce carbon emissions and prevent environmental collapse, many forget that hydrogen was already a viable option back when changes would have been easier to make. Instead, we lost time. Decades of time. Today, the auto industry faces a dilemma. The fossil fuel-based model is exhausted, environmentally and politically. At the same time, battery electric vehicles are gaining traction, but they come with their own set of challenges: lithium extraction, battery disposal, charging infrastructure, and concentrated energy dependency. Hydrogen reemerges as an alternative, but it arrives carrying the weight of having been rejected in the past, not because of technical flaws, but because of economic interests that decided the world wasn't ready. Now, automakers are rushing to catch up. Toyota leads this renewed race with the Mirai, a hydrogen-powered sedan already on the roads in Japan, the United States, and parts of Europe. Hyundai followed suit with the Nexo, an SUV boasting over 600 kilometers of range and zero emissions. Honda, although having paused production of the Clarity, continues to invest in research. The difference this time? The pressure is coming from the outside. The public is demanding change. The climate crisis demands action. And governments, under pressure from international agreements, are beginning to implement policies to support clean mobility. But it's not enough. We still lack fueling stations. We lack structural incentives. And above all, we lack the political will to truly break away from the oil-based model. Hydrogen is ready, but the world insists on treating it as a distant promise, when it could already be the present. It's as if we're trapped in a cycle where solutions are only adopted when they become absolutely unavoidable. The same thing happened with electric cars. They've existed for more than 100 years, but only began gaining ground when the situation became unsustainable. With hydrogen, history is repeating itself. But this time, we know what's at stake. We have information, we have history, and we have the evidence that the sabotage of the past made us more vulnerable today. Right now, governments are spending trillions to reverse damage caused by urban pollution, global warming, and the geopolitical instability tied to oil. Imagine if even a portion of that money had been invested decades ago in hydrogen infrastructure, for production and distribution. The major economies have started to wake up. Germany has launched a national hydrogen strategy with billions of euros in investment. Japan is pushing forward, betting on the construction of a hydrogen-based society as its energy foundation. And even in the United States, where oil lobbying has long dominated, there are signs of change. What's at stake now isn't just technology, it's energy sovereignty. It's the ability for a country, or even a city, to produce its own fuel without relying on international giants. And more than that, it's the opportunity to decentralize power, because hydrogen can be generated locally, sustainably, using renewable sources like solar and wind energy. That changes everything. This isn't just about swapping a gasoline car for a cleaner one. It's about transforming the entire energy structure of the planet, about taking control of the fuel that powers everything, from food production to global transportation, out of the hands of a few. And that's why hydrogen still meets resistance. It's a change that intimidates, not because it's unfeasible, but because it's too broad, too transformative. Even so, it's already happening. And the more people become aware of the hidden history, the sabotage, the missed opportunities, the buried documents, the harder it will be to stop this transformation. Knowledge is the key. Knowing that hydrogen isn't new, that it was already tested, that it already worked, and that it was silenced out of fear, greed, and self-interest. That changes how we see the decisions being made today. When you hear someone say, "We're not ready for hydrogen yet," remember, that exact phrase was used in 1950, 1973, and 1992, and it's still being used today, despite all the advancements. What we're lacking isn't readiness, it's resolve. The connection to the present is clear. We're living with the consequences of bad decisions made in the past, but we also have the chance to correct the course, to accelerate what was delayed and support technologies that should already be established. We can't go back in time, but we can learn from it. Hydrogen is one of those lessons, a painful one, because it shows us what we lost, but also a powerful one, because it proves we can still choose a different path. And now, with access to information, transparency, and public pressure, maybe they won't be able to hide this solution any longer. It's here, it works, and it can be a real part of our present, not just our future. Now that you know the full truth about hydrogen cars, one thing is clear. The future could have started much earlier. What was buried, ignored, or destroyed wasn't just an energy alternative. It was a chance to change history. And the most shocking part? This wasn't the only time it happened. The sabotage of hydrogen wasn't an isolated case. It's part of a bigger pattern. A cycle where sustainable, clean, and efficient technologies get shut down when they threaten the foundations of traditional profit. And if you were shocked to learn that hydrogen had its moment over 70 years ago, wait until you hear what happened before that. Most people don't know this, but back in 1900, there was an electric car that could have beaten the gasoline engine. It was quiet, easier to drive, and already had a basic home charging system. The public loved it, the press praised it, and the competition feared it. But just like hydrogen, that innovation disappeared. And the question is inevitable. Why? That's the story you need to hear next. Because before Tesla, before Nissan, even before the First World War, electric cars dominated the streets of New York City. Yes, dominated. Over 1/3 of all vehicles on the road were electric. They were driven by doctors, business owners, the elite. Newspapers at the time boldly claimed, "Electric motors are here to stay." But they didn't stay. They vanished. So what happened to that technology? Who decided combustion engines were the right path? And, more importantly, what was done to make sure it happened? In the next video, you'll discover how economic interests, advertising campaigns, and strategic decisions buried the first generation of electric vehicles. You'll uncover the behind-the-scenes of a historic shift that didn't happen naturally. It was engineered. If the story of hydrogen surprised you, this next one will leave you stunned. So if you want to understand how the past shaped the present of mobility, click now to watch the next video. You'll see that the history of clean energy has many hidden chapters. And they all have one thing in common. They were silenced by those who profited most from the roar of combustion engines. The truth is coming to light. And now, you're part of it.